The restaurant was busy that evening, filled with the soft chatter of diners and the occasional clinking of glasses. The air carried the delicious aroma of freshly cooked meals, roasted meats, sizzling vegetables, and warm bread that made mouths water. In the midst of this lively scene, a young waitress moved gracefully between the tables, balancing plates and taking orders, her mind focused on doing her job well. She was new at this restaurant, having joined only a few weeks ago, but she was determined to make a good impression. Every customer mattered to her, and she wanted to show that she could handle even the most demanding guests with patience and professionalism. Just as she finished taking an order from one table, the restaurant doors swung open with a quiet but noticeable presence. A tall, sharply dressed man stepped inside. His posture was perfect, and there was an air of confidence about him that immediately drew attention. Head subtly turned as he walked in, but he didn't seem to notice or care. He moved with purpose, scanning the restaurant with a calm, yet scrutinizing gaze, as if measuring the efficiency of every staff member and the quality of every detail. The restaurant felt ordinary at first glance, but now, with him entering, the atmosphere subtly shifted. There was a quiet tension, an unspoken understanding among the staff that someone important had arrived. The young waitress noticed him immediately. She had seen wealthy and famous guests before, but something about this man was different. He carried himself with a quiet authority that didn't need to be announced. It wasn't just his designer suit or the subtle but expensive accessories he wore. It was the way he walked, the way he looked at the restaurant as if it were a chessboard and he was calculating each move. Her heart beat a little faster. She knew that serving him would be more than just taking an order. It would be a challenge, one that required her full attention, her sharpest skills, and her best manners. He chose a table near the window, overlooking a small courtyard bathed in the golden light of the evening. As he sat down, he carefully arranged his belongings. His wallet, a sleek phone, and a small leather notebook. On the table, each item placed with precision. He didn't look around at the other diners, but there was a quiet confidence that made it clear he noticed everything. The young waitress took a deep breath, straightened her uniform, and walked toward him, trying to appear calm and professional despite the nervous excitement bubbling inside her. When she reached his table, she greeted him politely with a warm smile. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to our restaurant. Can I offer you something to drink while you look at the menu?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but internally, she was aware that this wasn't just any customer. There was something intense in his eyes, a sharp intelligence that seemed to analyze her as much as the menu. She felt a mix of nervousness and curiosity. Who was this man? What kind of person would he be? Would he be kind, or would he expect perfection to an impossible degree? The billionaire smiled faintly, a subtle gesture that was polite but unreadable. There was a quiet charm in the way he spoke, even if it was brief. "Water for now, thank you," he replied. His voice was calm, deep, and carried an authority that seemed to fill the space around him. The waitress nodded and walked back to fetch the water, trying to hide her excitement. She had served many customers in her short career, but there was something different about him. A mix of power, mystery, and an almost untouchable confidence that made her curious to see how the interaction would unfold. While she was away, she observed him more closely. He didn't glance at his phone or fidget like many others. He simply sat, looking around with quiet interest, noticing small details in the restaurant that most people wouldn't even think about. The way the lights reflected off the polished wooden tables, the gentle music in the background, the way staff moved efficiently without disturbing the diners. He noticed everything. There was an air of perfectionism about him, but also a sense of calm that made it clear he was in control no matter what. When she returned with the water, she carefully placed it in front of him and asked if he was ready to see the menu. He took the menu but didn't open it immediately. Instead, he observed her, as if measuring her confidence, her patience, and her awareness. The young waitress felt the weight of his gaze, but instead of being intimidated, she straightened her posture and gave him a confident, friendly smile. She realized that first impressions mattered here, not only for him but for herself as well. This was her chance to show that she could handle anyone, no matter how intimidating. He finally opened the menu, but his attention was still partly on her. She answered his questions politely, explaining the special dishes of the day with a clarity that came from both training and genuine pride in her work. She wanted him to feel welcomed, respected, and understood. Little did she know, this simple act of professionalism and confidence would be the very first step in a story that neither of them would forget. The arrival of the billionaire had turned an ordinary evening into something extraordinary. The restaurant, the staff, and especially the young waitress, all of them were now part of a moment that felt charged with anticipation, the kind of moment that could lead to an unforgettable encounter. She didn't yet know that this customer would test her intelligence, her patience, and her quick thinking. But in that instant, she carried herself with pride, ready to face whatever came next. The restaurant was calm in some corners but lively in others, with laughter and conversation blending with the soft background music. The young waitress, still carrying herself with quiet confidence, stood by the billionaire's table, ready to take his order. She had noticed his careful observation of the restaurant and the staff, and while most customers wouldn't notice such small details, he seemed to absorb everything. There was something about him, an aura of authority mixed with curiosity, that made her alert, yet not intimidated. She knew she had to stay professional, but at the same time, she felt a strange excitement. The billionaire finally looked up from the menu and made a small gesture toward the waitress. He leaned slightly forward and spoke in a low, deliberate tone. His words were in Arabic, soft enough that he assumed she wouldn't understand them. He thought he could speak freely, believing his language would give him a small shield, a private bubble in which he could make casual, even slightly cheeky remarks without being noticed. The words he whispered carried a hint of amusement, a playful smirk crossing his face as he watched for her reaction. He thought he was clever, confident that his words would remain secret. The waitress paused for a moment, pretending to check the menu again, but inside, a flicker of recognition sparked in her mind. The words weren't foreign to her. They were Arabic, a language she had grown up hearing at home. Her heart skipped a beat, but she remained calm, not letting the billionaire see that she understood him. In that instant, she realized that this encounter was not going to be ordinary. Here was a man who thought he was discreet, speaking in a language he assumed would hide his words, and yet she had the perfect opportunity to respond, not with fear or hesitation, but with cleverness and confidence. After a short pause, she lifted her eyes and looked at him directly. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, her voice calm but carrying a gentle firmness. Then, in fluent Arabic, she responded, translating his words exactly, but with a touch of humor and subtle wit. The billionaire's confident smirk faltered for the first time. He blinked, almost not believing what he had just heard. His words, meant to be private, were now perfectly mirrored back to him by someone he assumed would never understand. The young waitress's voice was steady, polite, yet it carried an unexpected charm that made the moment even more surprising. For a few seconds, the restaurant seemed to fade around them. The bustling chatter and the soft music became background noise as the billionaire stared at her in shock. He had never expected this. He was used to people reacting with confusion, hesitation, or nervous smiles when he tried to assert a subtle control. But here was a waitress who not only understood him perfectly but had responded in a way that was clever, confident, and respectful. His usual confidence wavered for a moment as he realized that he had miscalculated. The young waitress, meanwhile, maintained her composure. She didn't gloat, she didn't flaunt her knowledge, and she didn't let the surprise show on her face. To her, this was simply a moment of honesty and quick thinking. She understood the power of humility and discretion. Her reply was not meant to embarrass him, but to acknowledge that she was aware, capable, and self-assured. The confidence in her response was not arrogance. It was quiet, grounded strength, the kind that earns respect without demanding it. The billionaire, still slightly taken aback, leaned back in his chair. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel in control of the situation. He had whispered his words assuming secrecy, expecting compliance or ignorance, but instead, he found intelligence and calmness reflected back at him. The encounter challenged him in a way he rarely experienced. Most people in his life were impressed by wealth, status, or power, but here was someone who responded purely with intellect and presence, unshaken by his reputation or influence. He studied her carefully, noticing the subtle confidence in her posture, the way her eyes met his without fear, and the soft but unwavering tone in her voice. It was clear she wasn't intimidated by him at all, despite knowing exactly who he was. There was a spark of curiosity in his gaze. He wanted to know more about this young woman who could stand her ground so naturally. In that moment, the dynamic shifted. He was no longer simply a wealthy man testing someone, but a person genuinely intrigued by another human being's strength and intelligence. The waitress, sensing his curiosity, didn't push further but continued to show professionalism and kindness. She waited for him to continue with his order, offering the menu again and explaining the specials with the same politeness as before. Yet now, the air between them had changed. There was a mutual recognition of awareness. He knew she understood him, and she understood him as well. It was a silent acknowledgement that neither of them was ordinary, and that this meeting had significance beyond a simple restaurant encounter. As the billionaire finally chose his meal, the young waitress smiled politely, a small, confident smile that carried warmth and intelligence. The subtle tension from the whispered Arabic had transformed into a quiet respect. The encounter, brief as it was, had already created a connection, one that wasn't based on wealth or status, but on sharp observation, quick thinking, and human awareness. In that simple, unassuming moment, she had surprised a man who rarely, if ever, encountered someone who could meet him intellectually and emotionally on equal footing. The whisper had become more than just a few words in another language. It had become the spark of a story that neither of them would forget. A story that began with a casual remark, but quickly grew into an unexpected test of wit, humility, and mutual recognition. The young waitress had stepped into a moment that could have intimidated anyone, but she turned it into an opportunity to show strength, intelligence, and calm confidence. And the billionaire, for the first time in a long while, felt something unexpected. Surprise, admiration, and a spark of genuine human curiosity. The atmosphere at the billionaire's table had shifted in an instant. What had started as a casual, almost private whisper in Arabic had now become a moment charged with surprise and curiosity. The young waitress, calm and collected, had responded in perfect Arabic, repeating his words with a hint of wit and confidence that he hadn't anticipated. For the first time in a long while, the billionaire felt genuinely taken aback. He was used to people being intimidated by his presence, charmed by his wealth, or confused by his actions. But here was someone who met him directly, without fear, without hesitation, and without pretension. The moment hung in the air. He looked at her, eyes wide with a mix of shock and intrigue. There was something about her response that wasn't just about understanding the language. It was the confidence behind it. The tone, the clarity, and the subtle humor she used showed that she wasn't just smart. She was composed under pressure. She had flipped the situation entirely. What he intended as a small, private test had turned into a revelation. He had underestimated her, and now he was beginning to see her in a completely different light. The waitress noticed his surprise but didn't allow herself to smile too broadly or appear arrogant. She knew that moments like these were delicate. While she wanted to maintain her professionalism, she also wanted to show that she was aware, capable, and confident. Her voice remained steady, her posture upright, and her expression polite but firm. It was a perfect balance. She had acknowledged that she understood him fully but had done so without embarrassing him or drawing unnecessary attention. This subtle strength fascinated him. He had never encountered someone in a service role who could respond with such poise and intelligence, and yet do it with grace and respect. For a few seconds, he didn't speak. His mind was processing what had just happened. Usually, he could control a situation by intimidation, by the assumptions people made about him, or by the subtle use of his wealth and power. But this time, none of those tools worked. She had seen through the veil he assumed would protect his words, and she had responded in a way that neither flattered nor feared him. Her reaction was genuine, grounded, and entirely unexpected. The billionaire had always thought himself clever, but in this moment, he realized that he had underestimated the intelligence and composure of the people around him. The young waitress, meanwhile, continued to act as though everything was normal. She didn't rush, she didn't fumble, and she didn't allow the moment to distract her from her duty. She returned to her task of taking his order, explaining the menu options with clarity and a smile that showed both friendliness and professionalism. The subtle tension between them had transformed into mutual awareness, an unspoken acknowledgement that something unique had occurred. While he continued to observe her, intrigued, she remained grounded, focused and poised, never giving away the slightest hint of nervousness. As he finally began to speak again, the billionaire's voice carried a softer, more curious tone. There was no arrogance, no smirk, no condescension, only genuine interest. He asked about her background, not in a direct or intrusive way, but in a manner that showed he wanted to understand her perspective. The waitress answered carefully, sharing small, honest details about her life. She spoke of her family, her goals, and her journey to the restaurant. She didn't embellish or exaggerate, and she didn't try to impress him with anything other than her authenticity. He listened captivated, not by her words alone, but by the confidence and integrity with which she spoke. Her response, simple yet confident, revealed layers he had not expected. It wasn't just about speaking Arabic. It was about presence, intelligence, and the ability to remain calm under scrutiny. She had navigated the situation with skill, balancing professionalism with personality, and humility with quiet strength. Every word, every gesture, every glance conveyed that she was fully aware of who he was, but also that she was not intimidated by him. It was a rare quality, one that immediately commanded respect. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, a faint smile appearing on his face. It wasn't a smile of triumph or superiority. It was a smile of recognition, of surprise, and of admiration. He realized that his usual methods of control, whispers, secrets, assumptions were powerless here. She had met him on her own terms. He had been challenged, not aggressively, but with subtlety and grace. For the first time in a long while, he felt genuinely intrigued by another person, someone who could stand her ground without resorting to fear or flattery. As the waitress continued to take his order, she maintained that delicate balance between politeness and assertiveness. She explained the special dishes of the day, offered suggestions, and answered his questions without hesitation. Every action reinforced the impression that she was competent, aware, and confident. Someone who could navigate any situation with intelligence and poise. The billionaire, meanwhile, began to see beyond her role as a waitress. He began to appreciate her as an individual, someone with her own thoughts, her own strength, and her own voice. The unexpected response had transformed what could have been an ordinary restaurant interaction into a memorable encounter. It was no longer just about food or service. It was about human connection, observation, and the subtle dance of understanding between two people. The young waitress had surprised a man who was used to being in control, and in doing so, she had shifted the dynamic entirely. The billionaire felt a mixture of admiration, respect, and curiosity, emotions that were rare for him in ordinary social interactions. By the time he finally placed his order, the atmosphere between them had completely changed. There was no tension, no fear, and no misunderstanding, only a quiet respect, an awareness of each other's intelligence and presence. The moment had become a small but significant turning point, one that neither of them would forget. What started as a whispered remark in Arabic had blossomed into a test of character, a lesson in humility, and the beginning of an unexpected connection. In that single exchange, the billionaire had learned something important. Intelligence, confidence, and authenticity could never be underestimated. And the young waitress, without even trying to impress, had shown that true strength comes from composure, quick thinking, and the courage to respond honestly, even in the presence of someone powerful. The unexpected response had created a memory that would linger in both their minds, marking the start of a story that was just beginning. The restaurant had returned to its usual rhythm. The soft chatter of diners, the gentle clinking of cutlery, and the quiet footsteps of servers moving between tables created a familiar background hum. But at the billionaire's table, something had shifted. The young waitress had just responded to his whispered words in Arabic. A reply so confident, so precise, that it left him momentarily speechless. For the first time in a long while, he felt his carefully constructed image of control and superiority being challenged. It wasn't a confrontation, but it was enough to make him pause and reflect. He leaned back in his chair, swirling the water in his glass absent-mindedly. His eyes were distant, yet attentive, studying the waitress with a new kind of focus. Usually, people in his presence reacted predictably. Some tried to impress him, some were nervous, and others were quiet, unsure how to behave around someone of his wealth and status. But here was a young woman who had done none of those things. She had responded honestly, calmly, and intelligently, without allowing his reputation or appearance to intimidate her. He found himself thinking about how rare this was, how unusual it was for someone to meet him on equal footing without fear or flattery. In that quiet moment, he reflected on his life, his experiences, and the people he usually interacted with. He realized that wealth and power often built invisible barriers between him and the rest of the world. People treated him differently, sometimes with awe, sometimes with caution, and often with manipulation. But the waitress had seen through all of that. She had interacted with him as a human being, not as a billionaire, not as a status symbol, but as a person capable of thought, humor, and intelligence. Her response had bypassed all his usual defenses and reminded him of something he rarely allowed himself to feel: humility. The billionaire considered the way she had handled the situation. Her confidence had not been loud or aggressive. It had been quiet and measured, grounded in awareness and skill. She had acknowledged his words, but in her own way, subtly asserting that she was not someone to be underestimated. He thought about how often he assumed he could control situations, influence people, or predict their reactions. Yet in this moment, all of those assumptions had been upended. She had shown him that intelligence, composure, and honesty could command respect far more than wealth or authority ever could. He also reflected on the subtle power of language. He had spoken Arabic thinking it would hide his words, believing it would give him a private space to test her. But language, when understood and used with confidence, could become a bridge rather than a shield. Her response had not only surprised him, it had reminded him of the human connections that could be formed when people communicated sincerely, without pretense or fear. This insight, though small, felt significant. It was a reminder that people's true character often revealed itself in moments of honesty and quick thinking. As he continued to watch her, he noticed small details he might never have paid attention to before. The way she moved between tables with effortless grace, balancing professionalism with friendliness. The way her eyes lit up with genuine attentiveness when listening to a customer's question. The subtle gestures she used, offering a menu, explaining specials, answering queries with clarity. All of these showed competence, patience, and intelligence. It was clear that she was not just performing a task. She was fully present, fully aware, and fully engaged. This realization deepened his respect for her. For the first time, he also allowed himself to wonder about her life beyond the restaurant. Who was she? Where did she come from? What experiences had shaped her into someone capable of responding so calmly and intelligently to a situation that would have flustered many others? He felt a rare curiosity, a genuine desire to understand her as a person, not as a server performing a duty. There was something intriguing about someone who could maintain such poise in the face of unexpected challenges, and he found himself wanting to know more. The reflection went deeper. He thought about the times in his life when he had underestimated people, when he had assumed that wealth, status, or authority gave him the upper hand. How often had he missed out on seeing people's true character because he was blinded by their social position, background, or apparent simplicity? Here was a vivid lesson in humility. This encounter reminded him that strength, intelligence, and integrity often exist in places and people he might never expect. And sometimes, a single act of awareness or courage could leave a lasting impression on someone like him, a person used to commanding attention rather than receiving it. Even as he considered these thoughts, he was also aware of a strange sense of admiration. He admired her composure, her intelligence, and the quiet confidence that had allowed her to respond in such a perfect, balanced way. He felt a flicker of respect, not for her role as a waitress but for her as an individual. It was a feeling that he rarely experienced, and it was unsettling in the best possible way. For a man used to controlling situations, it was humbling and enlightening to realize that someone could surprise him without even intending to challenge him directly. As he sat there, reflecting, the waitress continued her work around him, unaware of the full impact she had made. She was professional, courteous, and attentive, focused on her responsibilities. Yet he could not stop thinking about that brief interaction. The whisper, her confident reply, and the way it had disrupted his expectations. He realized that this simple encounter had provided him with a fresh perspective on human interaction. It reminded him that intelligence, composure, and authenticity could leave an impression far stronger than wealth, power, or charm. By the time he placed his order, the billionaire had shifted. His mind was no longer preoccupied with control or testing. It was engaged with curiosity and respect. He had learned something unexpected about humility, about perception, and about the power of genuine human connection. The young waitress had surprised him in ways he could not have anticipated, and in doing so, she had opened the door to a moment of reflection that he would carry with him long after leaving the restaurant. In that quiet moment, he realized that this was more than a simple dinner. It was a reminder that even brief encounters can leave lasting impressions, that the strength of character can transcend social roles, and that humility and respect often arise in the most unexpected circumstances. He felt both humbled and inspired, understanding that intelligence, composure, and authenticity were qualities worth noticing and cherishing whenever they appeared. After the brief moment of reflection, the billionaire felt a subtle shift within himself. The surprise of the waitress's response had given way to genuine curiosity. He realized that he wanted to know more about the person sitting before him, the one who had managed to leave him completely speechless with a few calm words in Arabic. Her intelligence, composure, and quiet confidence had captivated him, and he found himself looking at her not just as a waitress, but as an individual with her own story, her own struggles, and her own dreams. He decided to engage her in conversation, not in a way that would feel like a test, but in a way that was sincere. "You spoke very well just now," he said, his tone warm but inquisitive. "May I ask, where did you learn to speak Arabic so fluently?" His question was straightforward, but it carried a genuine interest, a curiosity that was new to him. He was used to interactions where people flattered him, hesitated, or tried to impress, but this time he wanted honesty. The young waitress smiled politely, recognizing the shift in his demeanor. She appreciated the fact that he wasn't testing her this time, and that he seemed genuinely interested in knowing her story. "I grew up speaking it at home," she replied simply. "It's part of my family and my culture. I've always enjoyed the language and how it connects people." Her answer was calm, authentic, and humble, revealing just enough for him to sense that she was confident in her identity without feeling the need to boast. As their conversation continued, he began to ask about other aspects of her life. He asked about her work at the restaurant, her ambitions, and her family. She responded openly, explaining that she had worked hard to support her family, that she loved learning, and that she hoped to pursue opportunities that would help her grow personally and professionally. She spoke without exaggeration or pretense, and each word seemed to carry sincerity. He listened intently, realizing that this honesty was rare, especially in interactions with people in service roles who often felt the need to impress someone wealthy or powerful. Through her responses, he began to see her as someone with depth, intelligence, and integrity. It wasn't just her knowledge of Arabic or her quick thinking that impressed him. It was the way she spoke, the way she carried herself, and the way she seemed genuinely grounded. He noticed how she balanced confidence with humility, and how her composure remained steady even in the presence of someone as intimidating as him. For the first time in a long while, he felt that he was meeting someone whose presence commanded respect not because of wealth or status, but because of character and intellect. He found himself sharing small pieces of his own life, too, not in a boastful way, but in a human, relatable way. He spoke about the pressures of his business life, the isolation that sometimes came with wealth, and the rare moments of genuine connection that he cherished. She listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that showed she wasn't just polite, but genuinely interested in understanding him as a person. The dynamic between them had changed completely. He was no longer the observer testing someone. He was a man engaging with another human being who intrigued and challenged him in subtle, unexpected ways. The conversation flowed naturally, and in that flow, a connection began to form. It wasn't romantic or forced. It was a quiet, meaningful connection built on mutual awareness, respect, and authenticity. She didn't treat him differently because he was a billionaire, and he didn't approach her differently because she was a waitress. For a few moments, they were just two people, exchanging thoughts, observations, and ideas. That simplicity made the connection feel rare and precious, something both of them could sense without needing to put it into words. The billionaire found himself admiring her not only for her intelligence but for her resilience. He realized that someone who could stand confidently, respond thoughtfully under pressure, and remain grounded in her identity must have faced challenges and overcome obstacles in life. Her calm presence suggested a maturity beyond her years, a strength that he respected deeply. He began to reflect on his own life, on how often he had overlooked the character of those around him, assuming that wealth and power dictated their interactions. This young waitress had reminded him that true strength and intelligence often existed in places he least expected. Meanwhile, the young waitress felt a growing sense of pride and validation. She had approached this interaction professionally, but the billionaire's genuine curiosity and respect were unexpected. For someone who had often been underestimated, this attention from a person of such status was both flattering and empowering. Yet she remained grounded, answering his questions honestly without trying to impress. Her authenticity had created a bridge between them, turning what could have been an ordinary restaurant encounter into a meaningful exchange of human connection. As they continued talking, subtle gestures reinforced the connection. The way he leaned slightly forward when she spoke, the way he listened without interruption, and the occasional nod of understanding all indicated that he was engaged and paying attention. She, in turn, maintained eye contact, spoke clearly, and conveyed confidence without arrogance. It was a dance of mutual awareness, each responding to the other's presence thoughtfully, creating an unspoken understanding that went beyond words. By the time he placed his final order, the connection had deepened. He had moved from surprise to curiosity, from curiosity to admiration, and now to respect and genuine interest. She had managed to show him that intelligence, composure, and authenticity could leave a lasting impression, even in the briefest of encounters. He left the interaction feeling that he had met someone extraordinary, someone whose character and presence would not be forgotten easily. For the young waitress, the connection was equally meaningful. She had been professional, confident, and authentic, and in doing so, she had formed a bond with a person who could have been intimidating, yet had become someone she respected and intrigued her. It was a reminder that being genuine, staying grounded, and trusting her own abilities could open doors to unexpected connections, even with people she might have assumed were unreachable. That evening, what began as a routine service interaction had grown into something remarkable. The billionaire and the young waitress had formed a connection that transcended social status, wealth, and assumptions. It was a connection built on respect, intelligence, authenticity, and awareness. A connection that would influence both of them in ways neither could have anticipated. And though the evening was far from over, that initial connection had laid the foundation for something memorable, meaningful, and unforgettable. The evening continued with a calm rhythm in the restaurant, but at the billionaire's table, the atmosphere carried a quiet intensity. The young waitress had already impressed him with her intelligence, confidence, and composure, and the connection they had started to form was growing stronger. Yet, even as he found himself intrigued and respectful, a part of him, conditioned by years of power, influence, and scrutiny, couldn't resist subtly testing her further. He wanted to see not just her skill or knowledge, but her true character. It began with small remarks and casual observations, spoken in a tone that was soft enough to seem ordinary. He asked pointed questions about the menu, making unusual requests and hypothetical scenarios, as if trying to gauge her reaction. He inquired about the origin of certain dishes, the proper way to serve them, and even the reason why some customers preferred one dish over another. On the surface, these seemed like normal questions for a guest curious about his meal, but they were carefully designed to test her confidence, patience, and ability to think on her feet. The young waitress responded with grace. Each answer was calm, clear, and confident, demonstrating both her knowledge and her professionalism. She never hesitated, even when some of his questions were designed to be tricky or unusual. She explained each detail thoroughly, offering small pieces of helpful advice, and occasionally injecting a touch of humor that made the interaction feel friendly rather than stressful. The billionaire observed her carefully, noting the subtle balance she maintained between professionalism and authenticity. It was clear she was intelligent, but more importantly, he realized she was thoughtful, composed, and self-aware. Next, he added a layer of subtle challenge. He made a few comments that tested her integrity, some light, hypothetical statements suggesting shortcuts or bending rules, common in high-pressure work environments. His tone was casual, but his eyes observed her reaction like a hawk. Most people would have laughed nervously, nodded along, or offered a polite response to avoid conflict. Yet the waitress paused only briefly before answering honestly, without hesitation or pretense. Her responses demonstrated a strong moral compass. She clearly valued honesty and professionalism, even when dealing with someone powerful enough to intimidate most people. At one point, he spoke in Arabic again, quietly, hoping to test her awareness under pressure. He made a playful remark, expecting her to either misunderstand, hesitate, or nervously laugh. But she responded immediately, translating his words and replying with calm wit. Her ability to handle the unexpected in real time left him silently admiring her poise. It wasn't just that she knew the language. It was her ability to stay composed, think clearly, and respond appropriately under scrutiny. Every answer, every subtle gesture, confirmed that she had a strong sense of self and a keen intelligence. He also observed her behavior toward other diners and staff. She moved with care and efficiency, never seeming distracted or flustered by his presence. She treated every customer equally, listened patiently to each request, and offered assistance where needed. Even when other staff members made mistakes or seemed stressed, she handled situations calmly and gracefully, helping to maintain the restaurant's smooth operation without drawing attention to herself. To him, this was just as impressive as her direct interactions with him. She had integrity, skill, and leadership qualities, even in small, unnoticed actions. Throughout this test, the billionaire realized something important. Intelligence and skill alone were not enough to earn his respect. What mattered most was character. The ability to remain calm under pressure, to make ethical choices, and to act with authenticity and grace. The young waitress was passing every silent test he presented, not by trying to impress him, but by simply being herself. She demonstrated that true strength is often quiet, subtle, and consistent, rather than loud or boastful. At one point, he decided to push the test slightly further. He made a few ambiguous comments about money and status, designed to see whether she would respond differently to someone wealthy. Many people would have either fawned over him or reacted nervously. Instead, she remained polite, courteous, and grounded. Her replies were focused on the conversation itself rather than the wealth of the person she was speaking to. Her composure and clarity impressed him even more. He had expected people to react based on his status, yet she treated him like a person first, not a title. As the evening progressed, he began to appreciate the subtle layers of her character. He noticed how she handled pressure, how she balanced friendliness with professionalism, and how she communicated with intelligence and integrity. It was rare to see someone who could combine these qualities so naturally, without effort or artifice. He realized that his initial surprise at her Arabic response had only been the first glimpse of her strength. This extended interaction revealed a depth of character that was far more impressive. By the time she brought him his meal, the billionaire's silent testing had turned into quiet admiration. He no longer felt the need to challenge her further. The young waitress had passed every test without knowing she was being tested, simply by being honest, confident, and composed. He recognized that respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned, and she had earned it effortlessly. The way she conducted herself had revealed not just competence, but integrity, humility, and intelligence, qualities that he valued highly. This test of character had a lasting effect on him. It reminded him that wealth, power, and influence could only go so far in evaluating people. True understanding of someone's worth came from observing their behavior under pressure, their decision-making, and their ability to remain authentic in unexpected situations. The young waitress had demonstrated all of these qualities in the brief time he had observed her, leaving him both impressed and intrigued. By the end of this part of the evening, the billionaire had learned an important lesson. Character, intelligence, and composure were far more revealing than status or appearance. And the young waitress, without even realizing it, had shown him exactly what he needed to see. Proof that strength, integrity, and quiet confidence could leave a lasting impression on anyone, no matter their position in life. The restaurant had begun to quiet down as the evening progressed, with fewer diners remaining and the soft glow of the lights creating a warm, intimate atmosphere. At the billionaire's table, the air felt different from when he had first arrived. Earlier, he had been surprised by the young waitress's ability to understand his Arabic whisper, then intrigued by her intelligence and composure. Now, after observing her under subtle tests and engaging in meaningful conversation, a deeper realization began to dawn on him, a revelation that would stay with him long after the night ended. He leaned back slightly in his chair, his gaze following her as she moved gracefully among other tables. It was not just her intelligence or her ability to respond with wit that struck him. It was the integrity, patience, and calm confidence she displayed in every action. He realized that he had been so used to interacting with people who either flattered him or allowed fear to guide their responses that he rarely encountered someone who could meet him as an equal, someone whose strength was natural and unpretentious. In that moment, he understood the rarity of what he had experienced. This revelation was accompanied by an internal shift. The billionaire had spent years in business and society, honing strategies, testing people, and asserting control in every interaction. His wealth and status had often allowed him to command respect effortlessly, but tonight he saw the limits of that power. Respect that was earned through character, composure, and authenticity was far more meaningful. He realized that the young waitress had shown him a lesson he could not buy or command, one that only emerged from observation, experience, and genuine human behavior. He reflected on the subtle moments that had led him to this insight. Her calm response in Arabic had been the first sign of her strength. Then, her confident handling of his questions and the way she navigated his small tests of character had revealed intelligence, integrity, and self-awareness. Finally, her overall demeanor, polite, composed, and attentive to everyone around her, had completed the picture. He had seen someone capable of holding her own, someone whose presence inspired respect without demanding it, and someone whose quiet strength was both genuine and rare. As he sat there, he also thought about himself. He realized that his assumptions about people's judgments based on status, appearance, or expected reactions had often been wrong. How many times had he underestimated others, assuming they were limited by their position or background? How many times had he failed to recognize the true potential, intelligence, and integrity of those around him? This realization was humbling. The young waitress, simply by being herself, had shown him a new way of seeing people, not through the lens of power and wealth, but through the lens of character, competence, and authenticity. He found himself experiencing a rare sense of admiration. It was not admiration born of charm or social status, but of respect for her abilities, her composure, and her ethical strength. He marveled at how she had managed to stay grounded despite the power imbalance between them, how she had answered each subtle test without hesitation, and how she had maintained authenticity and humility throughout. It struck him that such qualities were far more valuable than wealth or influence, and that people like her were rare and remarkable. The billionaire's revelation deepened as he considered how many interactions in his life had lacked this authenticity. Most people, he realized, were intimidated, influenced, or cautious when around him. Few dared to show the courage and composure that the waitress had displayed. In her, he saw a person who had not only handled a high-pressure situation with grace, but also someone who had acted with honesty, integrity, and intelligence without needing to prove herself. She had demonstrated strength that did not rely on intimidation, charm, or social status, qualities he deeply respected. He began to feel a quiet humility, a recognition that life had offered him a rare lesson in the value of human character. This realization did not diminish his confidence or achievements, but it expanded his understanding of people and the kind of respect that truly mattered. He saw that wealth and power could impress temporarily, but they could not replicate the effect of authenticity and integrity. In her actions, he witnessed the impact of genuine human character, the way it commands attention, earns respect, and leaves a lasting impression. At that moment, the billionaire also acknowledged the unpredictability of life. How often do we encounter someone who changes our perspective in subtle ways, simply through who they are and how they act? He realized that this young waitress, by being herself, had altered the way he thought about interaction, respect, and human connection. She had revealed the limits of his assumptions and the power of authenticity. Her presence, calm and composed, had made a stronger impression on him than any business deal, luxury experience, or display of wealth ever could. He reflected further on the notion of equality and human potential. Despite the enormous gap in their social status, she had met him on equal footing, not by challenging him aggressively, but by showing intelligence, composure, and awareness. This, he realized, was a kind of power that money could never buy and influence could never force. Her strength lay in her character, her grounded nature, and her ability to navigate life's challenges with calmness and clarity. In witnessing this, he felt a profound sense of respect and admiration, realizing that true influence often comes from integrity and confidence rather than wealth or authority. Finally, the billionaire understood that this moment was more than a fleeting encounter. It was a lesson, a revelation that would stay with him. It was a reminder that in every interaction, beneath the surface, there is a wealth of character, intelligence, and potential waiting to be seen. By underestimating people, he had missed countless opportunities to connect, learn, and grow. But in meeting this young waitress, he had been given a rare glimpse of someone exceptional, someone whose presence, intelligence, and integrity could not be ignored or diminished by wealth, power, or status. In that quiet evening light, as she moved gracefully between tables, he felt a lasting respect and a sense of awe. She had shown him a new perspective on human nature, a perspective that emphasized character over position, intelligence over appearance, and authenticity over superficial charm. This revelation would remain with him, influencing how he approached people and relationships in the future. The young waitress had left a mark on him, not through wealth or status, but through her strength, wisdom, and humanity, a revelation that he would never forget. The evening was winding down, and the restaurant had settled into a calm, quiet rhythm. Most diners had finished their meals, leaving only the gentle hum of conversation and the soft sounds of cutlery being cleared from tables. The young waitress, as always, moved gracefully and professionally, ensuring every customer received her full attention. But at the billionaire's table, the atmosphere had shifted from curiosity and subtle testing to something deeper, an understanding, an acknowledgement of what had transpired between them over the course of the evening. From the moment he had arrived, the billionaire had been used to commanding attention. He was accustomed to wealth and power creating an automatic impression on people. But the young waitress had changed everything. Her intelligence, composure, and authenticity had captured his respect. She had handled his whispered Arabic remark, his subtle tests, and his curious questions with grace, patience, and honesty. She had demonstrated character in a way that few others ever could. By the end of the night, he realized that she had earned not only his attention but his admiration in a way that was profound and lasting. The final stages of their interaction were marked by warmth and mutual recognition. He smiled at her as she approached to clear his table, and this time his expression was softer, filled with genuine appreciation rather than surprise or calculation. "Thank you for your service tonight," he said in a calm, sincere tone. "You've impressed me more than I could have expected. Your intelligence, composure, and professionalism are remarkable. His words were simple, yet they carried weight. They reflected the respect he had developed over the course of the evening, respect that was earned not through money or status, but through character and capability. The young waitress responded with a polite, humble smile. She had performed her duties as any professional would, but she was aware, even subtly, of the significance of this moment. Her honesty, calmness, and composure had been noticed and appreciated, not for flattery, but because they reflected her true self. In her calm and professional manner, she acknowledged his compliment with grace, maintaining the balance of respect and humility that had defined her behavior all evening. As the billionaire prepared to leave, he did something unexpected. Rather than a simple nod or a quick tip, he requested a moment to speak privately with her. The young waitress felt a mix of curiosity and slight apprehension, but she followed him to a quieter corner of the restaurant. He spoke carefully, ensuring his tone was warm and sincere, free from the usual authority or expectations associated with his status. "I want you to know that tonight has been a reminder for me," he began. "It has reminded me that true respect and admiration come from character, integrity, and intelligence, not wealth or status. You have shown me these qualities, and they have left a lasting impression." Her heart beat a little faster at his words. She had remained professional, never seeking recognition beyond doing her job well. But hearing him acknowledge her in this way felt meaningful. It was not just praise for her skill, but acknowledgement of her character, her ability to remain calm under pressure, and her intelligence in handling unexpected situations. It was a reminder that authenticity and integrity were always noticed, even by those who were powerful and accustomed to controlling outcomes. The billionaire continued, "I rarely meet people who can handle themselves with such poise and clarity, especially when faced with unexpected challenges. Tonight, you have reminded me that true strength lies in authenticity and intelligence. That is far more impressive than wealth, influence, or status." His tone was reflective, almost thoughtful, as he spoke. It was clear that he had learned something valuable from this encounter, a lesson that went beyond a simple restaurant visit. She responded simply, with humility and honesty. She expressed that she had merely tried to do her job well, to be professional and attentive, and that she had not expected any special recognition. Her answer, calm and genuine, only reinforced the impression he had already formed of her character. It was clear that she acted from principle, not for attention or reward, and this sincerity left a further impact on him. At that moment, the billionaire made a decision that reflected the depth of his respect. He offered her an opportunity, an invitation to consider further collaboration in a professional capacity outside the restaurant. He did not present it as charity or a favor from a wealthy man, but as a genuine recognition of talent, intelligence, and potential. It was an offer based on respect for her abilities and character, rather than her position or current role. This gesture surprised her, as she had never expected that simply being herself, responding with honesty and intelligence, could open doors in such a remarkable way. As the evening concluded, the interaction left a profound impression on both of them. For the billionaire, the night had been a lesson in humility, respect, and the value of authenticity. He had entered the restaurant expecting an ordinary meal, perhaps even assuming a minor amusement in testing a staff member. Yet he left with a renewed understanding of character and the importance of recognizing true talent and integrity wherever it appears. The young waitress had challenged his assumptions, tested his perceptions, and ultimately left him deeply impressed, not by flattery or ambition, but by her authenticity, intelligence, and calm strength. For the young waitress, the outcome was equally transformative. While she had approached the evening professionally and with integrity, she had now been recognized in a way that validated her skills, her character, and her presence. The experience reinforced the lesson that confidence, authenticity, and ethical behavior could leave a lasting impression, even on someone accustomed to commanding attention and influence. She understood that how she carried herself, and the values she upheld, could create opportunities far beyond ordinary expectations. As he left the restaurant, the billionaire glanced back once more, a faint smile on his face, carrying with him a memory of the evening that would stay with him long after. He had been reminded that true respect is earned through character and integrity, and that extraordinary people often appear in ordinary places. The young waitress returned to her duties, her composure and professionalism intact, but carrying the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had made an impression that transcended wealth, power, or status. The evening's outcome was clear. Two people, from entirely different worlds, had formed a connection based on mutual recognition, respect, and authenticity. One had reminded the other of the power of humility and human character. The other had demonstrated that strength, intelligence, and composure could leave an unforgettable impact. What began as a simple restaurant encounter had become a story of respect, recognition, and the transformative potential of honesty and integrity. An encounter neither of them would ever forget.